Hi, I'm Dr. Scott.
And I'm Dr. Shiloh.
And this is LA Not So Confidential, the forensic psychology and true crime podcast.
Each week, we explore the intersection of psychology, the criminal justice system, and entertainment.
Today, our episode is on the forensic psych topic of body language experts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Happy August. Hi, Dr. Scott. How are you?
Hello. Good. We were talking about our shared use of pseudoscience to blame ills.
Yeah.
Because it's Mercury retrograde. So
For
just
once,
letting you know,
I brought it
everybody,
up
for the
first.
next 6 weeks, whatever goes wrong, you can blame it on Mercury retrograde and we'll let you off the hook.
Yes. Yeah. I brought it up in a text to Scott first. Like, is it Mercury retrograde right now? Because I don't have a water heater and my husband has COVID. So here I am, stuck in my house with
And a
cold
broken
water.
window and
Yes, and a
there's a lot
broken
of
new
other stuff.
window. So it might just be a pull day for a while. So,
Yeah,
but yes,
scapegoating in whatever way I can. So there you go.
love it. Love it. But yeah, that will be after recording marathons here this weekend. But don't forget, you guys, obviously, we have our festivals that we're doing this year quickly approaching. CrimeCon UK will be
Yes.
here in a blink of an eye. I've already started mentally doing my packing list, of course. So that's in mid-September. Go ahead and click the link in our show notes. Make sure you use that code confidential if you're going to buy tickets, and you get 10% off. We've also been blasting that on our social media, so you can always go back and check there as well. And then also we have the Berkshire Podcast Festival coming up in October. So already looking forward. Well, I mean, you know, I love summer and I don't like to rush summer, and it seems like everybody does because they want to get into cozy fall. But I'm really looking forward to cozy fall because of this festival this year.
Yeah, excellent. So in our last episode, number 187, we covered the topic of bullying and how in American schools, from elementary education all the way through the college years, there's been an increase in practice and an increase in scrutiny of this behavior. From threatening and coercive behaviors to outright criminal acts, bullying has morphed into a hybrid set of actions that take place in real life and in the digital world of social media and e-communication. Often, unfortunately, now we're finding out with long-lasting trauma and even sometimes deadly results. Please take a moment and check it out. We got a lot of responses across the board from this episode, primarily positive, about talking about some of the more research-oriented points of it. But
yeah,
give
some
it a
lovely
listen.
emails from educators and people who had experienced bullying themselves. So I'm so glad it reached some folks and was also triggering to others, which we understand. I mean, we understand with all of our topics that something is going to hit home with someone who's experienced something and doesn't always land well, but that's completely understandable, especially if they're seeking a certain topic and they search that out and land on our podcast. It depends, you know, where you're at in life and how you're going to take some of these topics sometimes. But yes, I'm so glad that overwhelmingly it seemed that folks were really responsive to the research.
Yeah. So I meant to ask you, what's going on with you right now?
What? What do you mean?
I mean, you know, really, Dr. Shiloh, what's really, really going on with you right now?
I thought I told you what's going on with you. What is this?
No, I mean, I just took a 45-minute video course to become a body language expert, and I can tell from your eyes darting all over the place on the screen this morning that you're hiding something from me.
Yes. Okay. Got it. All totally makes sense now. I see where this is going.
Right. Okay, folks. So in the subject of today's episode, body language experts, and I am using very wildly gesticulating air quotes when I say body language experts.
Just throwing air quotes out everywhere today.
Yeah, again, as I have prefaced many times in episodes over the years, I thought this was going to be a simple episode. I really, really did. And it's not. There is so much controversy. There is so much crap actually obfuscating the real research and the real phenomenon out there that I'm just going to invite you in this quite long episode. I'm going to invite you to actually please go read the many journal articles that we will have on our resource page, our notes page, because it's fascinating stuff. And there is so much controversy. And the point being, we'll touch on in a second, is how it influences public discourse in criminal proceedings. And we're going to give you a pretty solid background on that. So in the 2009 television series Lie to Me, actor Tim Roth played the character Dr. Cal Lightman for 3 seasons. And the character Lightman was presented as the world's foremost deception expert. And he utilized his expertise in analyzing facial expressions, body language, and vocal tones because he's able to use those skills to detect lies and uncover the motives of criminals. And his almost supernatural observational skills provided the apparently desperately invaluable support with his talents to law enforcement and government agencies in their pursuit of truth, because of course they're completely incapable of doing that on their own, and they have to hire somebody that is vaguely supernatural. But to give context, the show also presents him as somewhat of a manipulator. So I did like that sort of twist to the show.
Yeah. And unsurprisingly, the release of the television series coincided with a significant increase in the interest and claims of expertise in body language analysis, not unlike the CSI effect, the X-Files effect, the Silence of the Lambs effect. We're basically calling all of them effects, not just CSI.
Right.
But I mean, this is very reminiscent of our criminal profiling episode, right? Like,
Exactly.
is this a thing, and what has inspired it, and where has that sort of taken off? But the influence of these media projects of film and television, they do have an impact on Western culture and the educational interests and pursuits of people who are consuming this media. Despite or perhaps in conjunction with the Lie to Me's unlikely dramatizations, it contributed to a surge in people claiming to be body language experts, many of whom sought to capitalize on the popularity by offering courses and consultations based on the techniques shown in the series. For better or for worse, the show led viewers to develop an interest in these alleged techniques and believe in their applicability in the real world scenarios that we see in the criminal justice system. So the outcome was dual. The show brought widespread attention to the dubious field of deception detection through body language, facial expressions, micro expressions, etc., encouraging many people with both legitimate science, law enforcement, and military backgrounds to really present as experts here. Since 2009, the world has seen an explosion of these body language experts writing books and charging exorbitant fees for speaking engagements and popping up as talking heads on the infotainment shows that have a nexus with true crime. But is it a thing? Like, is it a real thing? That's what we're here for today.
Exactly. And to build on what you're saying, just as importantly, where is the nexus to crime here, right? So for the
Yeah.
purposes of what we do here at LA Not So Confidential, I mean, are we talking about body language experts who have committed crimes? No,
Couldn't
not
find that.
exactly. I couldn't
No.
find that particular thing, although I'm sure if it's someone, some of our astute listeners out there will be able to find an example. And we'll circle back around to that about sort of moral and ethical issues. But the issue here is more reminiscent of our previous episodes on bad actors in our field of psychology who have falsified data for the purposes of propelling their own academic and professional careers, and how these alleged body language experts are utilized in legal proceedings or in the training of law enforcement. And as you'll hear today, the self-promoting body language experts sell millions of dollars worth of seminars to law enforcement around the world, despite the stats not supporting the assertions of accuracy. Even in the preparation for this episode, the attempt to use multiple versions of Boolean search terms to find a nexus with crime and body language expert led to page after page of guess what?
I'm guessing ads and promotions, right?
Exactly, exactly. And primarily for 1 to 3 individuals who I'm just not even going to bother naming. And here's the thing. How does one go about making sure that they're on the first 1 to 3 pages of any search engine? By spending a lot of money on SEO optimization. So money, but money does not equal expertise.
Yeah. And it's really interesting right now in law enforcement because in about 4 years ago, when I was doing a little stint in the training division, I worked under a psychologist there. And, the tone then was that really around the nation, finally, law enforcement was like, we have to start moving towards evidence-based training and tactics and making policies off of data. But that didn't exist for a long time. And so you could kind of have carpetbaggers from wherever trying to sell whatever to law enforcement. And that was really kind of the norm for a while. And we see it in what you and I talk about a lot now is the wellness of law enforcement, because that's like the hot trend. So everyone's got an app, everyone's got a class, everyone's got a course. And a lot of it is just bullshit. So it's interesting with my unit that I work in that when the police department gets approached by someone trying to sell something like that, and it's in the realm of wellness, they use us as sort of this vetting process to say, what do you guys think about this? Which is wonderful. And I'm glad they utilize us in that way. But you really, for a while, could kind of sell anything to law enforcement, especially if it felt like it was really cool and it was going to be something that no one else was doing without really any evidence behind it.
Yeah, I remember there was a 60 Minutes episode years ago on this guy who had sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars this scanner that basically could detect any drug substance. It could identify if there was any gunpowder residue anywhere on a person. It could detect ammunition. And it turned out it was just like a plastic housing with like a little piece of cloth that he had, put some sort of elixir on that. And then he just made up a bunch of pseudoscience, and all these little agencies bought it and were swearing by it. It was like they were basically using dowsing rods,
Was his name Elizabeth Holmes?
Uh, yeah.
Oh gosh. But body language experts have really been on a roll in the last decade, but certainly for the last 5 years, and perhaps even COVID and the increase in online viewing due to the limited social interaction propelled this further. I mean, during that time, we had endless debates over Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's body language and the plethora of their public appearances.
Oh, yeah. And I'm going to circle down on one, but this is just one of many. Bruce Durham is a 41-year-old from Newcastle, England, and he created a video claiming to show the exact moment, quote unquote, exact moment that Meghan Markle, quote unquote, lied to Oprah. And he has no formal training in body language analysis or behavioral analysis. He's been involved in performance coaching for over 20 years, and he confidently states that his skills are self-taught. Here's a quote: "I've had thousands of hours of just sitting in front of people and letting them speak. And when you've spent that much time looking at people and practicing your observation skills, you can quickly develop trends and analysis. You just sort of join the dots."
What?
I'm just going to let that sit there for
Yeah.
a couple of minutes. People were commenting recently that we were depriving them of our snark in the last few
We
months.
went too clinical.
I guess so. So here you go. You're going to be getting a lot of snark in this one.
Just looking at people,
Yeah, just looking.
An analysis just happens.
Yeah, the shutting down of airports really impaired my research abilities, because I used to just go to the airport and sit for days at a time analyzing people. Anyway, he has a YouTube channel entitled Believing Bruce with almost 200,000 subscribers.
Of course.
I just to reiterate, folks, anybody listening, I'm sure you all know that's not true analysis. It's not like using the term analysis and you can quickly develop trends. I mean, that's badly spoken. But he's just one of the many talking heads out there that are making these outrageous claims. And of course, we cannot forget to mention the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp hearings, which were an absolute amazing and magnetic shit show, right?
Oh my God, yes. But I think, just to say again, like always, we're going to present the research here today, and then you guys get to decide how you want to move forward with that knowledge, however you see fit. So let's get into what some actual experts are saying.
Right. So Vincent Deneau, a postdoctoral fellow in psychology at McGill University, is the co-founder for the Center for Studies in Nonverbal Communication Sciences at the Montreal Health University Institute's Research Center. So, okay, already this guy, we got real legitimacy in a very specific area. Studies of nonverbal communication sciences, right? That is a legitimate title instead of like this sort of effluvia floating around about body language. So he explains that research from diverse fields like psychology, communication, biology, and ethology study nonverbal behavior and its impact on daily life. However, he emphasizes that there is no inherent universal language of the body, And here's a quote: "The public often believes that nonverbal behavior is solely useful for identifying liars, but that's not true." And in a 2020 study from the University of Portsmouth, which asked people to identify smugglers in videotaped ferry crossings, despite observers claiming to look for nervous behavior, only 39.2% correctly identified the smugglers, which is significantly below chance level. And in a September 2020 video about Amber Heard, YouTuber Logan Portenier films himself reacting to her testimony. He laughs, he smirks, and he rubs his face in disbelief, suggesting her snacking and lack of enthusiasm indicate that she's more likely an abuser than a victim. That's an incredible stretch. That's an
Mm.
incredible stretch. Regardless of how you feel about those proceedings,
Yeah.
this was one that the media, and even I will admit that I got sucked into this because the behavior in everyone involved was so over the top. So, I
Right.
mean, I was pulled into it. I think it's really important that we all pull back and look at these things from a bit more distance. And now, reflecting on that video that he generated, Portenier stands by his comments and admits, well, he probably spoke a little too strongly, and he would be a little bit more mellow if he were to make a similar video now. Doesn't matter if the horse is out of the barn, right?
Yeah.
But he agrees with Deneau about the dangers of pseudoscientific analysis. Well, thank you.
He goes on to say, on the internet, it's so easy to claim expertise without accountability. It is something that concerns me for sure. So Portenier's knowledge of body language is, as you said, mostly self-taught, though he has taken some psychology classes at university. He's been studying the topic for a decade, drawing on the work of former FBI agent Joe Navarro and psychologist Paul Ekman. Ekman's research on microexpressions, brief, involuntary facial expressions, suggests they reveal hidden emotions, although he admits such expressions are rare and has not published empirical data proving that they can actually detect lies. So, Paul Ekman is an American psychologist and professor at the University of California, San Francisco, and he's renowned for his groundbreaking research on emotions and facial expressions. He is even ranked 59th among the most cited psychologists of the 20th century. So, this guy knows his stuff, has conducted research for a very long time, and really has significantly contributed to understanding the biological correlations of emotions and how that might or might not show up on the outside. His work is rooted in a Darwinian approach aimed to demonstrate the universality and distinctiveness of emotions.
However, the problem with Dr. Ekman, despite his years of real dedicated research, is that his theories have faced criticism, primarily with other researchers saying that there absolutely is no universality when it comes to emotions cross-culturally. And there's some legitimate back and forth, and that's what's going to happen in science. Hopefully it does happen in science, that we constantly remain curious and we question studies to make sure that they're really hitting the points that they're supposed to hit to be legitimate. A lot of scholars out there argue that Ekman's research on microexpressions and the ability to reveal concealed emotions really doesn't have as much empirical support, and that the microexpressions themselves are not as common or reliable as his findings suggest. It's still interesting though, right? So these critiques are highlighting the ongoing debate and, again, the need for further research in the field of nonverbal communication. So Ekman is the inspiration for Lie to Me, and he served as the scientific advisor for the show. He has emphasized the importance of distinguishing entertainment from scientific fact, but his research and assertions have come under that scrutiny. Again, show dramatization versus legitimate research. If you're involved in a television show that is going through the decision-making process of more than 10 levels of creativity or pseudo-creativity, you got the writers, the showrunner, the producers, the studio, the network, everybody's going to have a say on what is being presented, and what is going to drive the presentation: viewership, right? So you have
Sure.
to show an elevated version of whatever you're doing in order for it to appeal to the widest audience, right? Again, the show's dramatization, Lie to Me, contributed to a surge in people claiming to be body language experts. And a good number of them sought and continue to this day to capitalize on the popularity of this quote unquote science by offering courses and consultations based on the techniques as they're shown in the series. So again, differentiate body or behavior analysis versus body language. Those two things are, yes, there's an intersection, but they're not the same thing.
And I mean, I don't want to say that we're blaming Ekman here for like
No,
that result, right? Like he's just an
exactly.
advisor. We see this
Right.
with all types of professions and advisors on films. You know, the one in law enforcement that we talk about all the time is like the manipulation of firearms and weapon systems. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's just so ridiculous, but you know, you can give your 2 cents and they do what they want with that. And then, you know, to go even further to say like, this is how it then influenced people to start having some interest in this pseudoscience, not his fault.
Right.
So, a closer look at the accuracy and reliability of body language analysis as depicted in Lie to Me is clearly overstated. And of course, it goes without saying that such an accusation could be said about many law enforcement, medical, or legal procedural shows. But the
Absolutely.
portrayal of something that doesn't have ongoing substantiated research is problematic to a degree. Research has shown that techniques for detecting deception through nonverbal cues are not as foolproof as the show or as these quote unquote experts suggest. So, studies indicate that the average person's ability to detect lies through body language is only slightly better than chance. Additionally, experts caution that without proper training and context, relying on body language alone can lead to misinterpretations and incorrect conclusions. I can't remember which episode it was on before, or even if it was maybe a guest spot that we did. But I know we talked about this slightly where actually if you have people, just average people, you know, in a lab, in a study, trying to detect truthfulness, we're actually pretty good at that as human beings. It's definitely above chance. But when people are lying, that's when things get tricky. So, you know, with Ekman's research and looking, you know, culturally and globally, when someone's just expressing an emotion on their face, yeah, I think the research is pretty robust in that there are similarities throughout cultures, right? But that's just a truthful, authentic expression of emotion. Again, it gets super, super tricky when someone's trying to mask that.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you know, maybe there's so many testing platforms and modalities that can be used when you're pursuing doctoral work. And, you know, when you're in your doctoral program, you get like the basics. You don't get necessarily all of them because there are so many out there. But one of the ones that was really fascinating to me that was supposed to be used for people on the autism spectrum was a series of cards of collages of actual people. Like, so these were people, but that the photographs that had been artistically rendered to express the most commonly expressed emotions around the world. And it was meant to set up to see how insightful an individual could be in recognizing those
Mm-hmm.
emotions. And that was interesting because they would even caution you, like, this can be very, very helpful in certain settings, but it's not, you know, you have to take into account different cultural, different societal factors from around the world. Interesting stuff.
Sure, sure. So, as another example that just, you know, went went downhill pretty quickly, in December of 2018, the case against Chris Watts was pretty much done by that point. After interview and interrogation, he admitted to the murder of his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their daughters, Celeste and Bella. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility where he had worked and concealed his children's bodies in oil tanks.
So there's a lot of crime that occurs around the world. This was a particularly brutal one. It's one of those that absolutely jumps out in the true crime community where immediately you have a gut reaction of how is this even possible, right?
Sure.
Because those are such horrific acts. And the story of those brutal crimes now becomes fodder for the talk show circuit with Dr. Phil presenting a panel of experts, among them, admittedly, one of my favorites. I mean, I love Candace DeLong. I've always loved
Mm-hmm.
her. I love the way she writes. I love the way she presents, you know, She was probably one of my gateway drugs into the realm of true crime for all of her talking head presentations. And she's also sitting along with other people like Nancy Grace and a woman named Susan Constantine. So Constantine is introduced by Dr. Phil as a quote unquote renowned body language expert with no references to her training, education, etc. I do understand it's not like you on a time limited show, you can't sit and just give somebody's full bio, but I'm
Right,
going to
right.
encourage people to Google Susan Constantine and look at her bio, her background, her training. And they're reviewing footage from Chris Watts, the body cam footage. And there's this panel, they review about 3 minutes of the body cam showing Chris leading police through his house and then viewing a neighbor's security cam footage. And Constantine is asked by Dr. Phil, well, what do you see?
So she says, well, first of all, his emotions are detached. When somebody is concerned about somebody that's missing, you're going to see pain or suffering in their forehead. This wrinkling up the concern when we see him pacing back and forth. That's internal anxiety. So it's a self-soothing gesture to the ones that where he's holding his hands like this. Other moments he's holding his head, and that's showing that he's concerned, but it's also panic. There's lots of emotions that are flying. So whatever we're thinking and feeling is being exhibited through our nonverbal communication. Oh God,
Okay,
are you going to do the? Are you going to
do we
do
want to
the
let
accent?
I will in a second, but do we want to let that sit? I just it's to me listening to her say that, and I transcribed it word for word,
Right, right.
is I think that's a bunch of nothing because it's, you could say the same thing ostensibly about we're interviewing a man whose wife is missing,
Sure. Yeah,
right? Wouldn't,
concern, panic.
concern, panic, all those things. This wrinkling of the forehead, not necessarily. This, all these things. There's just, it seems to me there was just a lot of assumptions. Now, I'm going to give her the benefit of a doubt in this particular moment. Is some producer may very well have said, "Get to your point. It needs to be under 45 seconds. That's all you've
For
got to
sure.
make your
Yeah.
reply." That's absolutely a possibility. So then Dr. Phil replies, and I'm from the South. He's from Texas. I won't do his accent, but I think it's hilarious. Anyway, well, let's look at him watching some surveillance video. This is his neighbor's house. His neighbors had cameras, and so they caught him on camera backing his truck into the garage where he loaded the bodies in. And he's there seeing his footage for the first time. Watch this. The park out there is on the side. It'll be easier for loading everything out there, all the tools that I had to bring in. Do you think this may be the first time that he thinks, holy crap?
So she responds by saying, it was definitely an oh my God moment. There was no doubt. So when he was first looking at the video, it didn't hit because it didn't know that what it was about to see the minute he saw that. Oh my God, that's when his hands came up. He started to pace. If you look at it close, his flashing, his back to, and he doesn't want to look. He can't. He can't look at because of those oh my God moments. He almost has to deflect from it.
So just in all seriousness, folks, the reason this sounds so disjointed is it's literally a transcript. I just didn't want to mess. I don't never want to mess with pulling audio from another platform, even though they're
Right.
fair use doctrine. I'm not going to do that, but I'm telling you, I, painstakingly slowed down the audio so that I could tape it. That's why it sounds so disjointed. Again,
Well, and
it's not a very professional response. It sounds like she's really rushed in like, hey, you got to get that quote out. But it's, again, it doesn't
and
substantiate what it's supposed to substantiate.
when you and I have been asked to do appearances or, just even pretty casually on other podcasts, generally we're going to ask, okay, what do you want us to hit on? You want to be as prepared as possible. So, and in the times that we have had to do shorter quips, it's like to have all my bullet points in a row. Okay. If I was a body language expert and I was going to talk about him watching this video, I would want that information up front to be able to say, he does this, that means this. He does this, that means this, right? Like,
absolutely.
It feels like she's flying by the seat of her pants on the spot, which if they wouldn't give her the stuff ahead of time, that sucks. And that, maybe.
Or if she didn't know to ask for it, right?
Yeah, true.
When you've been on, like, one of the things, this is also part of you and I both have certain areas that, like, we could probably recite it in our sleep. But you have a really particularly elegant way of explaining trauma responses and, the 4 F's or the 5 F's. You do, like,
Hmm.
you've got it down to a science, and it's been commented on several times when you've been interviewed. Well, that's something that you've prepared because it's going to be part of the
Right.
conversation.
Right.
So if Constantine wasn't prepared, or if she was flying by the seat of her pants, then yeah, there's some wiggle room. But again, it just seems like there's a lot of supposition that's going on here. I mean, I feel like in this particular example, what is way more helpful is that the neighbor is present there on the body cam footage, and he adds more to the investigation than anything I've heard otherwise regarding Watts's behavior. So the neighbor is commenting that this is not his regular behavior, and he's like indicating this rocking, right? So no, look, you look right, get out. My wife and I were kind of wondering where she was on vacation if something happened, because I've heard them screaming at each other, they at the top of their lung. Yeah, it gets crazy. So pretty recently, I mean, that's why she visited, people said, so she wanted to get away from the situation. So
Yeah.
now here's someone that is a witness, and he's talking about baseline versus elevated
Right.
or different behaviors.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he has some personal connection there. So back to the body language expert on the Dr. Phil show. She says, yeah, yeah. And the other thing is that these type of people can be natural performers. They're very likable. They're very approachable. They can be very charismatic. And when you tap into things you find fault with, they become unglued. So look for those signs. Do they have their appropriate emotion that fits what they're saying? If things are off, ladies and gentlemen, listen to that, because that is telling you it is off and done. Make excuses for it.
So again, that's a direct quote that was typed in. It doesn't really, without the nuance of her presenting it, some of those sentence fragments don't really make sense. So, I mean, looking at
Hmm.
this from a clinical perspective, the only one thing in particular in this scenario, as I said before, is the ability to compare a perspective of a current behavior to a sound foundation of baseline behaviors. And I think the only one that's able to do this is the neighbor. So this is someone who's actually witnessed for an extended period of time what the Watts' normal daily routines were and what their physical presentations were like, and how this is very different from the past. That is real science when you're comparing baseline behaviors
Right.
versus
Yeah.
non-baseline behaviors.
So it's, harkening back to criminal profiling. It's a little bit like when they want to look at post offense behavior, like how is that person's norm changed with their friends and their family? Is there some emotionality coming up afterwards that has some legitimacy to it? Or talking about in like school shooter data that we have, or mass casualty violence incidents where the behavior, and especially when you're looking like before the offense happens, as the behavior, the baseline behavior for that student or that child or that person then starts to change, they're then on the pathway. So that has been well established and
Exactly.
looked at in the research and the literature. Those are definitely behavioral changes, but they're still not like the only thing that we pin something on. It's definitely taken into context, but those markers tend to be there. And I think as we touch on, like a lot of this ends up being the body language expert stuff ends up being in hindsight, or really early in the investigation where kind of like everything is a possibility.
Yeah, it makes me think about the interviews, and I just laugh. I mean, this is something that is pretty commonly known within our field, people who do psychotherapy, that people who tend to have a baseline lifetime experience of anxiety, and it may not be that they're necessarily diagnosed with GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder, but anxious people tend to have a running narrative in their head, making sure that they have covered their bases. It's a little bit OCD. It's the kind of the
Hmm.
thing we joke about is, walking out of a department store and like, I didn't just mistakenly steal a 42-inch color television, did I? I didn't like
Are these
hide that.
alarms going to
And
go off?
are these alarms going to go off because I inadvertently stole something that I would never do anyway?
Right.
But like, it made me think about if, God forbid, I was ever arrested or questioned on something because of a crime, I would look like a total freak in the interview room. I have a herniated disc that is literally 40 years old. And even I explain that to my people that I provide therapy to is I'm going to be crossing my legs every couple of minutes back
And
and forth
shifting. Yeah.
because I'm going to be shifting. I have a back problem. I just want you to understand what this behavior is. And everybody always appreciates it. Like, thank you so much for explaining that. But I
Hmm.
would be like leaning forward. If I was in an interrogation room for 12 hours, I would be doing yoga. I would be doing handstands. I would be doing
Yes, you
yoga
would.
butterfly position. Like, no, go on. I'll answer your questions. I'm just going to stay here
Can
down
I bring
here
my
and
roller with me?
I'm going to stay here in pigeon pose, right?
Well, I cross my arms all the time. Like it, and I think I'm more aware of it when I'm doing telehealth because I like sit back in my chair and it's a different chair and I cross my arms and then I will catch myself in the camera doing it and I'm like, why am I doing that in a therapy session? What are they thinking?
Well, I know because that's what Zoom or
Well, yeah.
e-therapy has done to us now is we're also hyper aware, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I didn't realize I was like favoring one side, like I'm looking
With your head
like
tilt.
like a questioning dog during an entire session. So I've somehow corrected that. But back
Yeah.
to body language experts.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of on in that vein, as we've shared, body language experts often make these exaggerated claims
Yeah,
that significantly stretch the boundaries of scientific validity, like the common assertions that, single and specific nonverbal behaviors, a nervous cough, the darting of eyes during speech, sitting back in a chair, crossing the arms, are
right.
actions that, when performed, can reliably indicate deception or maybe hidden intentions. And these assertions, even after years of repetition, just continue to lack empirical support and are often based on anecdotal evidence rather than legitimate scientific research.
Absolutely. And another one in that list, touching the face. It's so often misinterpreted as a sign of lying, despite studies showing that these behaviors are common self soothing actions that occur in various contexts, not just during deception. That is science right there by Virage and Bond and DePaulo in many separate studies. And
And
when the
God forbid
general,
you have allergies and your nose is itchy all the time, like
right,
me, like just
right.
constantly, like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, when general public, law enforcement, legal entities have an over reliance on nonverbal cues, this is going to lead to significant misunderstandings and misjudgments across the boards. So, body language experts like Janine Driver have faced criticism for providing her audiences oversimplified interpretations. Driver has appeared on a lot of media platforms, and she often emphasizes specific gestures as indicators of deception. But again, her interpretations are not always supported by scientific consensus. And there's a paper about this from 2010. And I want to note that Driver has been quite open and authentic about her experience of trauma as a child and how this informs her work. So I'm not going to go into this hugely, but I do want to point out something that's very interesting, and it's about hypervigilance because trauma can make people more acutely aware of their surroundings and potential danger. It can increase ability to sense factors, characteristics, and others that may have previously contributed to trauma, and can also contribute to misinterpretation of data of the individual's surrounding environment. So the reason I say that is because I'm very interested in this from a number of levels. I'm wondering if a lot of these people that consider themselves to be body language experts have a history of reading the room really well or thinking that
Mm,
they read the room really well from whatever reason. And I'll tell
yeah.
you, if anybody is out there considering pursuing their doctoral work, like we have many listeners, we do really have a number of listeners that have pursued this field after listening to our show. I would love if someone would do their dissertation or a study on professional psychics, people who are working in that field, that pursuit of mediumship or psychic phenomenon or claiming that they have these abilities. And I would love for someone to get a questionnaire to get an anonymous, huge study of these people and see if they have trauma in their background.
Yeah. I mean, you'd really just have to do the ACEs with them and
Yeah.
it'd be really pretty simple if you can
Yeah.
get the population. And while you're at it, recruit some body language experts.
Yeah, as a comparison. Wouldn't that be interesting? Yeah.
Yeah, it would be very interesting. Another pretty out there claim that is promoted by some body language experts is the belief that people can be categorized into distinct personality types based solely on their nonverbal behaviors. It suggests that characteristics such as eye contact preferences, self touching habits, and even facial features can define an individual's personality and communication style, and then further provide a predictive model for future behaviors. This is a really narrow view, a very simple view of presentation that doesn't take into account the complexity and variability of human behavior, as well as the influence of cultural and contextual factors. For example, Alan Pease, known for his books on body language, has made assertions about gender differences in nonverbal communication that have been criticized for lacking scientific rigor and ultimately for perpetuating stereotypes.
So the actual scientific community widely acknowledges that human interactions are way too intricate to just be reduced to a set of universal body language indicators. So this is where I'm going back to where we started out at the beginning, is that even Ekman at one point was really strongly advocating that there was this universal set, and the research doesn't support that. So making these kind of claims is misleading and it's scientifically unfounded. So in more research by Vriezbond and DiPaolo in the journal Psychological Science in the Public Interest concludes that many popular beliefs about body language and deception are not supported by robust empirical evidence.
And just think of how many times we've talked about the wide variety of how people react after or, during trauma. And what we're talking about here are crimes, right? So whether you have perpetrated the trauma, been a victim of the trauma, walked in and found a victim, all of that is layered on top of now basically a science that doesn't exist just on a regular person not experiencing trauma.
Exactly.
So it's, if you just take that, I think that's the simplest way to just say we can't give any credence to a particular situation or person when we're looking at these true crime cases. In a 2010 article for The Intercept, Richard Leo states, quote, "The search for a foolproof method of lie detection has a long history." So Leo is a professor of law and psychology at the University of San Francisco School of Law, as well as an expert on interrogation practices. He goes on to say the search for some way to be able to read body language, demeanor, vocal pitch, gestures, and then infer with a high degree of accuracy whether someone is telling the truth, it just doesn't exist. He also says that much of the assertions about human lie detectors parallel claims of psychic ability.
And see, this is where experienced mental health clinicians from disciplines including social work, marriage and family therapy, LPCC, and those of us that are at the doctoral level of psychology education come in. Licensed clinicians are educated and hopefully trained even further on the impact of culture on body language. Body language interpretation is highly influenced by cultural contexts, and these contexts are influenced heavily by a wide selection of intersections of ethnicity, culture, race, and gender. And in cultures where the control of body movements and emotional expression, or even the acknowledgement of emotion states, there's a huge impediment towards qualifying and quantifying this expertise, really. So we've referred to this many times over the years as we discuss media pundits' views of what their opinion is of how someone acts in those court proceedings that you were talking about.
And taking yet another intersection into consideration is our field's current understanding of the wide spectrum of neurodiversity that has not been previously acknowledged. The presence of neurodivergent individuals significantly complicates this field, as their experience of nonverbal cues can significantly vary from neurotypical norms. There's a growing theoretical foundation of body language analysis that has had some merit and implications for future research, but its practical application just continues to fall short. A lot of the self-proclaimed experts in this field perform poorly in empirical tests, highlighting the lack of scientific rigor and reliability in body language analysis. So, as a discipline, is body language analysis a good crime-solving tool? At this time, the science says no.
I have so many mixed feelings about social media influencers commenting on mental health diagnoses and even neurodiversity at times. Like I
Right.
want everybody who has an experience to be able to utilize free speech to speak openly about their experience. But when it veers into like self-proclaimed expertise just because you have a diagnosis, that's not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily correct. All of that being said, I saw something so fascinating as I was doing this research, and it was a young man, probably in his 20s, who was talking about, and this guy is, maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, but this guy is absolutely stunning. Like I'm talking about, he has that golden mean of perfect facial symmetry,
Right.
bright green eyes, dark hair. I mean, the guy is like just on that level of good looking. And he's talking about how, I think he works as a model, but he was talking about how difficult it had been for him historically to date. And somebody pointed out to him that he had a really bad, a good friend took him aside and said, well, you have this thing you do when you meet women. When you're talking, you can't make eye contact.
Huh.
But when you're listening, your eye contact is way too intense. And he said, are you aware you're doing that? And he kind of, now he became aware and he tried to correct it, and it made him incredibly uncomfortable. So he ends up going to a therapist, and the therapist goes, you're on the spectrum, and she was
Hmm.
able to point out all these other behaviors, which he was then able to adjust to. And then adjustment brings up a whole other question of, are you masking for the public? And you are. That's what people do, is they mask in order to contain and sort of have an influence on how other people perceive them. So anyway,
Sure.
it's just fascinating. And the point here that I want to emphasize about what you shared is that we have always thought historically of individuals with ASD as being one particular set, instead of looking at it holistically and understanding that there are so many people all along these plot points on the ASD, and that has an influence in how they are read. So that in itself really belies a lot of this pseudoscience that these are
Sure.
claiming, right?
Yeah, it makes
But
sense.
these days, many of these people who are self-proclaimed body experts are generating their income through YouTube channels rather than professional engagements, and for better or worse, we are part of that crowd. Like, we have a YouTube channel, we have a podcast, right? I
Sure.
get it. But this reliance on social media can be an indicator of the lack of demand for their services in real world applications. It's like, nobody's hiring you to do it, so why not just put up something that's showy and loud and dramatic and gory, and get people to
Have
sign up?
you ever been to a professional like conference or symposium, law enforcement or otherwise adjacent, where you've seen any of them speak? I haven't.
Oh my god, I never even thought about that, Charlotte. I haven't.
I've been to a lot of like behavioral analysis conferences and seminars over the years. Mostly put on by the FBI that is vetting their experts pretty well, but I haven't seen
Even
them
the
in a
ones that
professional
Yeah,
setting.
and even the ones that I've been able to be privy to through my connections in law enforcement, like evaluation and interrogation techniques,
Hmm.
they never touch on that. So
Yeah.
anyway, they're selling it somewhere, I guess, or if they're not selling it, then it's a product that's then put on social media. So, the problem here is that we have to talk about sort of the human version of the algorithm, right? Because the result is that these individuals often will tailor their analyses to align with what their audience's expectations are, rather than providing objective interpretations based on their observations and based on science. So when body language experts are tested on unfamiliar subjects, their performance is really poor. And it circles back to our previous point of why there's this lack of scientific validity in their methods.
Yeah. And if, it's kind of like, again, like when you and I are asked to comment on something, sometimes we can't, or sometimes what we say is incredibly boring and dry. And we're just like, use it or don't, because we can't give you more than that. But that comes from training and experience with an ethical foundation. So, which, most professional training programs, whatever that is, if it's education, if it's an academy, what have you, is going to have built into it. So then you have kind of these pseudosciences that don't have that as one of their cornerstones. And I think it's even been something we've had to like keep ourselves reeled in a little bit to make sure we don't cross over into too much of the conjecture. Does it fly out of our mouth every once in a while? Yes, of course. And, on
Yeah.
top of being clinical psychologists, we are also human beings. So we have a mind of our own and opinions of our own that sometimes get mixed in there. But to be able to take a step back and say, this is my opinion and or this is data driven is like a constant dance that you and I are
Yeah.
pretty hyper aware of. A really important point here to make is that the analysis that is offered by the experts will frequently focus on criminals who have already confessed or been convicted, such as Chris Watts. So their conclusions about the individual's body language offer really little new insight because that person's guilt has already been established. Maybe it's like, okay, what can we learn from this? But it's not lending any credence to their superpower.
Yeah, it's Monday morning quarterbacking, right? In a way. So somebody that I do like, that I was prepared not to like because I was not familiar with him, because I was just like, oh my God, these people are all ridiculous. And then I found this guy who I actually want to take one of his seminars, and I've ordered a couple of his books, is Joe Navarro. And I'm just going to say he seems to be the real deal from my limited point of view in researching for this episode. He has legit real world impressive training and experiences as a former FBI agent. And he specializes in quote unquote behavioral assessment, which I like a lot better than like all these other terms have been used. He was an FBI profiler, and he's the founder of the FBI National Security Division Behavioral Analysis Program. And after his retirement from the FBI, he's authored 13 books dealing with human behavior and body language. And the main things that pop out to me about him are clearly his expertise. He has legit cultural sensitivity and awareness and curiosity about everything that he says. He does not oversurmise, and he refers constantly to legitimate research. And
Nice.
We're talking about like anthropological research, which was completely my hook when he was talking about it. So in an interview with Wired magazine that you can find in our show notes, please look at our show notes. There's some really great things there this episode. He gives what I believe to be a much more balanced and nuanced view of behavioral analysis. And so some of the points that he hits on, one of the big ones is staring. So based on Kleinke's 1986 research published in Cognition and Emotion, the duration and context of eye contact play really crucial roles in our social interactions, and it affects our perceptions of friendliness, dominance, and our attentiveness. And Navarro explains that in different cultures, what we consider staring can vary greatly. So even within the US, for instance, he goes on to say that in New York City, it's common to maintain eye contact for about 1.28 seconds. Which is a duration that has been validated and studied. I think that's fascinating.
Wow.
Because in the Middle East, eye contact can last between 4 to 6 seconds. I'm uncomfortable even thinking
that's way too
about
much.
That.
No.
That's way too much, right? So this variation emphasizes that cultural norms significantly influence acceptable durations and areas for eye contact. And in a business setting, it's recommended to focus on the area between the eyes and the mouth, while in social settings, your gaze can drop below the chin. However, looking as low as the breast area is considered completely inappropriate in business context. Hopefully everybody would understand that.
Scott, my eyes are up here, okay?
Keep them, yeah. I'm looking at your eyes. I'm looking at your forehead just to be safe.
It's nice and smooth, isn't it?
Right.
So another one is eye rolling. Rolling your eyes indicates contempt, which is hierarchical and implies superiority over another person. It's super interesting. The gesture is not only rude, but can also damage interpersonal relationships. So I love that he touches on this. I'm sure we all have a teenager that we know that I don't know. We roll our eyes a lot. I don't know.
We do, but I'll tell you, like as a personal anecdote, I have absolutely fantastic nieces and nephews that I think hung the moon, and they have wonderful spouses. They're just like the coolest people ever. And my niece, Kimberly, I remember her at 3 responding to an adult in the room by rolling her eyes. And I died laughing.
So
and I was
good.
like, oh my God, you've got my blood in you. You are like, we are so related. Just like this big
Yes.
old dramatic eye roll. It was wonderful.
Navarro also comments on repetitive behaviors. So, behaviors like foot tapping or finger drumming help us pass time and manage stress. So, these repetitive actions are soothing because they involve muscle compression and release, sending calming signals to the brain. A further point on a particular repetitive behavior is when he talks about pacing. So, pacing, we know often seen in anxious or stressful situations, can actually help calm us down. Again, this is due to the movement of our bodies and then actually the fluid in our inner ears, which stimulates tiny hairs that are sensitive to this movement. And this principle is similar to why rocking a baby soothes them. Additionally, the calf muscles act as a second heart in aiding in pumping blood upward, which tends to enhance your cognitive function to be able to think through the situation that you're in.
That's fascinating. So it's both stimulating calm and it's stimulating cognitive processes. That's fascinating. So Navarro also links back to proxemics theory, which was developed by researcher Hall, which emphasizes the role of cultural and individual differences in personal space and
I
how
love
that
personal space.
impacts social interactions. If anybody's a fan of Seinfeld, the close talker episode is hysterical. Just everybody's reactions to the close talker. This varies culturally and individually. And he is pointing out the research that shows that New Yorkers tend to stand closer to each other compared to people from the Midwest, maybe because there is less room in New York, I guess.
Yeah.
And to avoid discomfort, it's advisable to take a step back after shaking hands and observe the other person's reaction. If they also step back, they may prefer more space. If they move closer, they might be more comfortable. That's very interesting because today, especially after COVID, like the whole shaking of hands thing is a big discussion. And one of the things that has been assumed about shaking hands is that it was to show that you weren't holding a weapon, which is absolute bull because prior to this century, weapons were like the size of an axe, right? And actually, Navarro, this is where he goes into the anthropological studies, is that because we're primates, that reaching out and touching of hands is to make physical contact, to say, I'm not your enemy. Here's a gentle touch.
You know what I
And
just learned?
what?
As a baseball fan, I don't know how I didn't know this, and my husband told me this. High fives didn't start until 1977, and it started in baseball games. How is that a thing? I'm like 1977.
I think I knew that. I mean, I may have
Oh my
forgotten, but I
gosh.
knew it was relative. Maybe I didn't know it was from baseball, but I knew it was
Yeah.
relatively recent, that it was just
Dusty
not a
Baker
thing.
gave the first high five, and it was kind of an accidental thing, but then they went with it. And I'm like, it didn't exist before the 70s? What?
Isn't that interesting? Now somebody's going to like dig up a pharaoh's tomb at some point and there'll be a high five and we'll go, no, it's been around for
Right.
thousands of years. But going on that touching, some people frequently touch each other during conversations to emphasize points or gain attention, and that can be uncomfortable for other people. I'm from the South. That's not like a big thing in the South, but somehow that was a habit that I had through high school, through college, and it wasn't until I was in a professional setting. And also like being a dancer, we're always
Yeah.
on top of each other. I'm literally being very intimate with my dance partners. I'm throwing them all
Right.
over the place, catching all that kind of stuff. But then I was told in another situation, like, hey, I'm really not comfortable with that. And it was mind blowing for me. Like, of course, why would I
Right.
assume that somebody would be
Duh.
comfortable with this?
Yeah. He also
Yeah.
talks about clearing your throat or using filler words. So, like these verbal tics that we have, Jason, you can leave that one in. Often, these verbal tics can precede difficult statements that you're getting ready to say. They also are part of what we call paralanguage and serve as a way to create psychological comfort or some psychological space when you're speaking. And recording yourself and seeking feedback can help in reducing this distraction if you're going to be talking live. If it's recorded and you have an editor, you luck out there.
It's true. Although, in the development and the evolution of our media together, our first few years when I was editing it myself, the filler words were the bane of my existence. It would take hours to take them out. And we're a lot better about it now. It's about pacing. It's also, watching yourself, and, there's the benefit of watching yourself on a camera, hearing yourself speak, and then also having an editor that has a wonderful program that can take
Wow.
those things out.
Yes.
But the most annoying one that Navarro talks about, and I felt a kinship with him immediately because he agrees, is manspreading.
Oh my gosh.
It's this phenomenon, which I think is, I don't know if there's research talking about its development, but or its etiology, how long it's been in the culture. But it's a very prominent issue on transportation, especially in
Mhm.
planes. Like, I can't believe, like, people just like intentionally spreading from the middle seat. Like, dude, what is
Ew,
wrong?
intentionally spreading. Don't ever
Yeah,
say that again.
exactly. Well, there's this theory that people tend to occupy space based on their feelings of confidence and strength. So socially, a person can feel entitled to this space immediately around their hips, plus an additional 1 to 2 inches, and overstep these boundaries, known as manspreading, can infringe on other space and cause discomfort. There was some research that was trying to say for a while that women were really attracted to manspreaders, that it was very masculine, it was very alpha, and like all this, I mean, like the research came swinging back going,
Oh, I'm
no,
sure.
absolutely, it is not. Like, people find it absolutely obnoxious.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in looking at how there are some challenges, again, like circling back to law enforcement and how much they're sort of playing into this use of body language analysis, there's an article called The Junk Science Cops Use to Decide You're Lying by Jordan Smith. So he delves into the flawed methodologies employed by law enforcement to detect deception. And he described a training session entitled New Tools for Detecting Deception. And that was led by Renee Ellery, known as Eyes for Lies. So he says in his article, quote, the training session was billed as cutting edge, and dozens of law enforcement professionals signed up to learn about these new tools for detecting deception from a human lie detector, again, who calls herself Eyes for Lies. She claims that she's just one of 50 people identified by scientists as having the ability to spot deception with, quote, exceptional accuracy. Ellery claims to have an exceptional ability to spot deception as a skill she says is scientifically validated. However, her training, attended by various law enforcement officials, relies on theories that many psychologists consider discredited or just pseudoscientific.
So, author Smith, for this article, highlights that despite participants finding the training useful, the techniques taught, such as identifying universal facial expressions and subconscious behaviors, do actually lack scientific backing. Experts like Jeff Kukuka and Richard Leo criticize these methods as ineffective and compare them to psychic abilities, emphasizing there is no reliable way to read body language or facial expressions to determine lies accurately. And Smith attempted an email exchange requesting more detail in an interview with Ellery. She responded that she wouldn't have time to explain things to him unless he took one of her courses, a masterclass, quote unquote, costing $1,950. However, she further explained that her classes were not currently available.
Oh, darn. Dr. Jeff Kukuka, an assistant professor of psychology and law at Townsend University, studies forensic confirmation bias, interrogations, and false confessions. He states unequivocally, quote, it's completely bogus. And what's maybe more alarming about it is that this isn't new. We've known for quite a while that this stuff doesn't work, but it's still being peddled as if it does. The article also explores broader issues with law enforcement training based on unproven science, such as the potential for false confessions and wrongful convictions. I think that's obviously pretty well known.
Yeah.
Many true crime products and podcasts and shows have definitely brought that to light. But notably, this article also mentions the Reid technique, which is or was a widely used but controversial interrogation method linked to many false confessions. And in contrast, the article suggests that non-confrontational rapport building interrogation techniques are actually supported by recent research and could be more effective and less likely to lead to false outcomes.
So, attorney websites that reflect on body language and body language experts, and let me emphasize, there are actually a lot of attorney websites that have pages about this, are very interesting because they too themselves question the body language expertise. But It's very interesting, one that I found that I was not expecting, that focuses on how to prepare for a legal proceeding by adjusting your body language. So if
Hmm.
you're a witness, you can go to the courtroomsciences.com website, and they emphasize the importance of body language and potential witnesses. And it's highlighted by this quote: "While a compelling witness can help you secure a positive outcome for your case, at the same time, a nervous or rattled witness can disproportionately impact settlement and trial outcomes. With the success of your case being inexorably tied to the performance of your witness, witnesses who display poor body language or nervousness during questioning can easily make errors that devastate your case. Mitigate risk and achieve superior outcomes by understanding the psychology of body language." So it would seem that for some in the legal world, the coaching of body language is informed by a couple of points: the needs of the legal offense or defense, which is based on the attorney's perception of what presents well in order to support that narrative.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, in this case, we're not talking about necessarily science to make this person not appear deceitful. We're just talking about the way a jury's perspective, like the lay person, is going to read something, right? So I think it all comes down to trying to be as neutral as possible, probably.
True. I wish that was focused on. I wish that the word neutral
Yeah,
was focused
yeah,
on, but I'm not
that's
sure that
true.
that attorney wants to say neutral, right?
Well, I think that's a good point. Like, depending on, is this the prosecution or the defense? But the article goes on to assert that a compelling witness can positively impact case outcomes, while a nervous or rattled witness can harm the settlement and the trial results. Where there's also the fact that poor body language or nervousness in witnesses can lead to mistakes that may just jeopardize the case altogether. And they have tips to avoid negative body language, which includes avoiding fidgeting, maintaining good posture, not adjusting your clothing, making solid eye contact, not touching their face. There we have it again, and looking interested. So the witness effectiveness training really does kind of include witnesses understanding that body language significantly affects their credibility, while also including some role playing with extended questioning, getting immediate feedback on the spot, and then a lot of practice to learn how to just be a good witness and get these techniques down. So let's look at some criminal cases that have been related to body language experts and their commentary. An example that really nails the BS of body language interpretation stems from the terrible events leading up to and following the death of Gabby Petito. And just as a recap, Gabby Petito, she was a 22-year-old woman from Long Island and was reported missing in September 2021 during a cross-country road trip with her fiance, Brian Laundrie. And Petito had been documenting their journey on social media, presenting an image of an amazing life of adventure, complete with gorgeous vistas, lovingly preparing meals, and even making mundane moments of life on the road seem incredibly romantic.
So concerns arose when Brian returned home alone to Florida on September 1st, driving Gabby's van. And after a nationwide search and extensive media coverage, Gabby's remains were discovered on September 19th in Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming. Her death was immediately ruled a homicide by strangulation. Brian Laundrie, the primary person of interest, was later found dead in a Florida nature reserve in October, with authorities concluding that he died by suicide. As more information emerged regarding their relationship, their individual personal struggles, and their interactions with law enforcement initiated widespread public scrutiny and illuminated issues of domestic violence and the role of social media in falsely shaping the viewer's audience's perceptions of reality. So there is a YouTube channel by a set of people who call themselves the Behavior Panel. And while, if you are a subscriber to them, I'm sure in their many, many, many videos, there are some things that are possibly of use and legitimacy. But I'll tell you this, the episode of their commentary from the time when all this was going down, let's just say it really does not age well at all. And I'm surprised that it's still up.
Mm. Yeah, they have a disclaimer on their channel that states, quote, "The opinions contained in this publication reflect and represent the views and opinions of each of the individual speakers and are not the views or opinions of anyone else. All statements by the individuals in the broadcast reflect and represent their personal opinion only, based on their years of experience and study in their respective subject matters of experience and education, and in the case of any opinion voiced in this particular publication, are based solely on the reference materials published therein. The opinions represented are just opinions and do not intend to represent any factual claims about any specific individual directly or inferentially, and should be understood as much. Copyright and all rights reserved, of course.
And then it goes on to say the behavioral panel comprises the world's top body language and behavior experts: Scott Rouse, Mark Bowden, Chase Hughes, and Greg Hartley. They analyze behavior and body language in videos of public interest. This nonpartisan group aims to educate and entertain, focusing on nonverbal communication, deception detection, behavioral analysis, statement analysis, interrogation, and resistance to interrogation. Through careful examination of gestures, expressions, linguistics, and cultural context, they reveal truths and deceptions. The behavioral panel is prominently featured on the Dr. Phil show and has its own show on the US TV network, Merit Street Media. So I'm just going to encourage people, and maybe this will lead to some lively discussion on a future episode or on our Discord. I would encourage going and watching that particular episode. I just going to say that in these two quotes that are openly and freely posted on their YouTube channel, there, to me, seems to be some contradiction. I'm going to set this up and tell you that this is just for entertainment. These are just our opinions, but our opinions are based on this. But hey, it's this. We're subject matter experts and we're this, and this. It's just a little bit too complex for my comfort level.
It comes back to being able to, you can say you're an expert on something, isn't really science-based if you want to.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's just taking that for what it is. And if it is predominantly for entertainment, great. And people can choose to consume it or not.
Yeah.
So going back to a little bit of research and looking at Ekman again, by his own admission, microexpressions that reveal concealed emotions aren't all that common. And academics note that he has not published any data empirically proving that microexpressions can be used specifically to detect lies. So let's refer to some of the more recent research that debunks some of the assertions in this area. There's a Psychology Today magazine article entitled "Debunking Body Language Myths" by Vanessa Lancaster, and her co-author on that is Abby Marano, PhD. The authors assert that on an almost daily basis, they receive numerous requests from around the world regarding nonverbal communication, particularly about detecting deception through body language. In the article, the authors address 10 prevalent myths about body language that persist in popular discourse. What I find really fascinating about this particular article is that the former FBI agent Joe Navarro that we were talking about earlier is listed as a co-author.
Which makes me even like him even more, really. So I'm just going to quickly go through these and bullet point them. But on the issue of detecting deception through nonverbal behaviors, again, they point out there's no better chance of detecting deception through body language alone. That's already been set up by Ekman. No single behavior is indicative of deception. There just isn't one that is absolutely cut and dried, indicative across the board of deception. They also go on to point out that the polygraph is used primarily as a tool, but the notion that polygraphs can reliably detect lies is just really a significant myth. The APA polygraph testing lacks statistical validity because no specific physiological reactions are unique to deception, but the polygraph is used as a tool across the board in many settings. It's used as a tool for certain outcomes and desired outcomes versus actually detecting deception.
And if you can't do it with a machine, then maybe you can't do it alone. Maybe that's also just a bottom line takeaway.
That's a really great point. Yes.
They also look at hand movements and their meanings. One myth posits that scratching with the right hand indicates a need for help, while the left hand signifies temporary uncertainty. This claim, based on the hemispheric dominance of brain functions, lacks empirical support. So we know that both hemispheres of the brain are deeply interconnected. Yes, they have their own things that they are responsible for, of course, but there's no evidence suggesting a causal relationship between specific hand movements and someone's emotional state. They also look at categorizing personalities by body language. I mean, this feels like such a reach to me. We even have a hard time just in research psychology looking at categorizing personalities.
With
But
tests.
with
We have tests that test
absolutely,
for this, right?
absolutely. So the idea that all people fit into these three distinct neurological profiles discernible through body language is just completely unfounded. I mean, human behavior is far too complex for that.
Yeah, they go on to point out another one that I think is hilarious is contempt and asymmetric facial expressions. And there's this belief that contempt is the only emotion that is displayed asymmetrically on the face, and that's misleading. There's some great research around contempt and micro expressions that Dr. John Gottman has been doing for years.
Sure.
We'll do a little bit on Gottman in just a second, but that's very interesting. Emotions are dynamic and they can often coexist and contradict each other in microseconds. Absolutely. So asymmetric expressions can indicate a range of emotions like disgust or embarrassment rather than just contempt. I remember years ago being at a conference.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a speaker that was new. Nobody knew this person. And the speaker got up and spoke for over 3 hours and absolutely did not know what he was talking about. Had
What?
no clue what he was talking about. It was all BS. And it was a room full of 150 psychologists, and the horror, you could feel it in the room, like, oh my God, why is this person speaking?
3 hours?
Yeah. And I was up at the front of the room, and my colleague Keo texted me from the back of the room, and she could see my profile, and she's like, Scott, you have to watch your face, like your face, you're because I was sitting there like with like a little emoji, like an emoticon
Yeah.
with like
Yeah.
the raised eyebrows, and my mouth was hanging open. So
Well, someone like that deserves those faces to be staring back at them, in my
yeah,
opinion.
exactly. So going back, eye contact and deception, it's a myth that liars avoid eye contact. That's completely contradicted by research.
Then we have the 93% nonverbal communication rule. I think we've probably all heard some sort of percentage. Like, right,
93%. Like I'm just over
90%.
here doing interpretive dance while I'm talking, right? Look at my movements.
Well,
Don't
it's
listen to
you.
me.
You kind of are.
Right.
But this is the claim that 93% of communication is nonverbal. That stems really from a misinterpretation of a study that was done that focused on communication involving only one word, and it really doesn't generalize to all human interactions. There's also, we talked about this, but they address this in their article about arm crossing and discomfort. While crossing arms can signal discomfort, it's often a very comfortable resting position as well, or a self-comforting gesture. I think I do it when I'm like aware of my posture and I want it to look a little bit better. It feels like a way to kind of balance myself out. But we have all sorts of conscious and subconscious ways in which we're doing some of these things, or reasons in which we're doing some of these things. So the context is very significant for accurate interpretation.
Absolutely. And the same thing goes for facial touching. Like you're saying, it could be allergy season.
Yep.
So it's not that you're lying, it's that you need to take your Zyrtec, right?
Yep.
It's also a self-soothing gesture. And then eye movements, the belief, this has been around forever, the belief that looking up to the right or down to the left indicates lying. And that's just been completely debunked by a lot of research. A review of 23 out of 24 peer-reviewed studies found that there is absolutely no reliable correlation between eye movements and deception.
So this highlights many of the myths about detecting deception and interpreting body language. As responsible professionals, anyone claiming to be an expert should be willing to question the validity of claims and consider alternative explanations, as well as recognize the role of cultural factors. So important. A healthy dose of skepticism and reliance on empirical research is essential in understanding the complexities of nonverbal communication. But there is real research out there about body language and microexpression that is legit. And it is ironic, as the legit research was inspired by shoddy research.
Exactly. Because it's shoddy research that as I was scrolling through social media this morning, There is a guy who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, and he's selling himself as an expert on couples communications. And I could only listen to like 45 seconds of what he said before I had to, because everything was so misogynistic. It was
Oh,
like
great.
it was one step from pickup artist. And I was like, this guy
Great.
somehow decided he would get his degree in psychology and get licensed. And I just like, okay, I don't want to see
Cool.
any more of your feed. But we're going to talk about somebody who actually is really legit, and that's Dr. John Gottman. And he is known as one of the foremost experts on couples therapy and couple dynamics. And for years, he's made really audacious claims regarding his and his colleagues' ability to predict whether or not couples would be successful in relationship by observation of facial expressions and the couple's communication styles. Now, I'm oversimplifying it, folks, and I don't want to sound disingenuous, because the research is really fascinating. And he has an entire institute in the Pacific Northwest where, people absolutely, like, there's a waiting list of people to go and be trainees in this technique. And then
Yep.
he has like couples who are in therapy, and there are multiple cameras focused on different areas of their face, very, very close up, so that they can do rigorous scientific analysis of when there are micro expressions that occur during the couples therapy. So this is scientific method. It's been going on for decades. Really, really interesting. He and his wife worked together on this. It began with a focus on identifying reliable behavioral patterns within couples interactions. And the goal was to determine whether specific sequences of behavior could differentiate between, get it, happy and unhappy couples. So initially, there was no guarantee that any of these patterns actually existed. So to address it, Gottman and his colleagues developed sophisticated mathematical models for a sequential analysis, a methodology that is very well established in our field. Their efforts led to the identification of consistent interaction sequences, which he details in his book, Marital Interactions, Experimental Investigations. So starting back in the 70s, he began the systematic observations of couples in a lab. And really, our field previously struggled to establish reliable personality patterns, which led to skepticism about studying couples. It's hard. It's hard enough studying one-on-one interactions,
Right.
really,
Right.
in the long-term therapy. So then you add another element into it, or a third element that's watching the plate spin. It's going to be really difficult. But what his work revealed was significant regularity in couples interactions over time.
Right. So, what they did is they developed new observational coding systems and methods for analyzing the interaction sequences that they saw with couples. They also created a talk table allowing participants to rate the positivity or negativity of their intentions and the impacts of received messages from their partner. And then the Gottmans collaborated with Robert Levinson in the mid 70s and integrated the study of emotions with psychophysiological measurements and video recall methods. That then evolved where he started utilizing Paul Ekman's work and Wallace Friesen's facial action coding system and the specific affect coding system. I mean, this is very detailed. When we're talking about micro expressions, I mean, using video
Tiny,
to,
tiny, right.
yeah, to look at nanoseconds of data
So
here.
So, folks, basically what was happening is that Gottman starts on this path, and then he discovers Ekman's and Friesen's coding systems,
Right.
but the coding systems were being misinterpreted. Like, those weren't marriage and family therapists, or they weren't psychologists. I mean, he is a psychologist, yes, but Ekman had a road that he was looking at, and Gottman was like, wait, this can apply to what I'm trying to do, and you have an established coding system.
Mm-hmm.
I know it gets very nerdy, but this is fascinating stuff that they were able to utilize and come together using, with scientific rigor, actual statistically validated models.
So, what their key findings were is that they were really able to demonstrate remarkable stability in the couple's interactions if these couples were going to last and stay together. They identified that 69% of relationship problems are perpetual and rooted in personality differences. And they were able to predict divorce with over 90% accuracy by
Yep.
analyzing emotional expressions, physiological responses, and specific interaction patterns.
So I'm not a numbers guy, but For anybody else out there who's not a numbers person, 90% accuracy
Yeah, come on.
is unreal. And I mean, but this is statistically validated. And he's gotten so good at it. He makes a joke when he presents that he can sit with a couple and in less than 5 minutes, he can know whether or not the relationship is going to last. And that's taking into account like personality disorders and things that he's been dealing with for years and years. So, his micro expression study and the nonverbal communication study was clearly excuse me, was clearly influenced by Ekman's research on the microexpressions. And microexpressions, as we said before, are brief, involuntary facial expressions that are supposed to reveal true emotions. But the point was is that Gottman brought it down, like, let's bring it down to just a certain handful of emotional responses rather than making these huge suppositions across the board. And then he was able to apply all this to marital studies and show about the impact on relationship dynamics and conflict resolution. So now there is criticism of Gottman's work, and the criticism goes back to other researchers and experts in the field saying that it overlooks individual issues that contribute to larger relationship issues. I completely respect that. However, I do want to point out that Gottman is talking about, regardless of those individual issues, what is the communication style? Can the communication style, if addressed, change the outcome regardless of the
Yeah.
individual
Yeah.
issues? Like that's what I think is interesting. So, and the critics go on to say that there just needs to be, you have to address these individual issues and there needs to be more research. And he continues to research. So it's
Well,
fascinating stuff. And I know we took you guys on a real tour today going all over the place, but it's about body language, right? What works, what it's good for, and what's bullshit, basically.
right, right. And I think, we have to ask ourselves, why is this interesting? Why do people eat it up? And
Right.
I think it's a number of factors, right? It's kind of like that unknown. Like we started off with the TV show Lie to Me. It's almost like, okay, let's put this sort of like paranormal superpower piece into it, which is always intriguing. But it makes like the unknowable knowable.
Right.
And we've had such a hard time detecting liars forever that it feels kind of cool to think maybe we have some people that are really good at that. And what does that do? It gives us a sense of security or protection or safety. Like we can learn how to then protect ourselves from these con artists or, even worse, some violence. But yeah, what I would love to hear is, instead of commentary on video of the true crime case of the week, I would love to know, and I don't know if any body language experts have been this close in consultation with law enforcement, but I wonder if they've ever brought them in at a point where they're interrogating someone and said, "Hey, what do you think? Should we continue with this interrogation? Do you think we're going down the wrong road?" That would be interesting to me. It's not super fancy. It's a little dry, but it's almost this consultative role. And I think of the consultative work I do in crisis negotiations in the moment, right? Because sometimes they turn to me and they're like, "Doc, are we getting anywhere in this negotiation, or do we call it an impasse? Do we have to go to, tactics because we're just not, like, the conversation is just not going the way we want it to go?" And honestly, there's not much of a rubric there. Sometimes I'm going off of just, how I'm constantly assessing that situation. But it would be interesting. I don't know. I don't know if any of them have gotten to do work that closely in
Yeah.
the moment or not.
Yeah. And
But
then
we don't hear about it.
you'd have to find a way to quantify it as well.
Well,
So
sure, sure.
how are you going to have a control group for this? Or are you going to have they're looking through the two-way mirror and asking, well, what are your thoughts on this? Should we stop? And then not necessarily following it, and not even, and have a separate person, like not let the person asking the body language expert have any influence on the person who's actually doing the
For sure.
evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what you're proposing is fascinating. We have so many friends in this genre and so many people that we respect. And, one of our all-time favorites, who's just like an all-around great dude, is Javier Leyva. And he's got a
Yes.
whole production about pretend. And I highly recommend, if no one's listened to it, go back, start from the very beginning, because everything he does is so good. And that's a great example of people, just even if you're not watching video, listening to vocal affect and how
Mm,
people will just start to ramble. That to me is a big take right there, is when somebody doesn't really know what they're doing, they're rambling and creating a reality as they go. And some people are really, really good at it. But that's a good example.
so is rambling scientifically based, Scott, of them not knowing?
It should be. They could study me. They could
Right?
study me for rambling.
Such a rambler too. Ugh.
Yeah. But so, yeah, this is
Wow.
fascinating stuff. I will say this is kind of relationship and behavior analysis adjacent, because I want to put this
Mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is gaslighting.
Yeah.
Not all narcissists are gaslighting. Sometimes people are just lying and they're just being jerks. And there's
Yeah.
a differentiation there that people should understand. I just thought I should add that in, because that seems to be such a discussion these days. Like,
Not everyone's a
yes,
narcissist.
yeah, not everybody's a narcissist. Sometimes you're just an asshole.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Exactly. We'll leave you guys with that.
Yeah, that's your
Thank
bon
you for
mot for
being
the
on
day.
this. Yeah, this hour and 45-minute journey with us today. So, with that, we'll have another episode for you guys this month. We couldn't help ourselves. We're doing a vintage one just for some end of summer fun.
Yes, 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 yes.
So, yeah, we will. There were my fillers. So, yeah, my filler words. It's because I don't want to go. I don't want to say goodbye. It's making me uncomfy. With that, we'll see you guys next time on LA
Not so.
Confidential. Take care, guys.
Bye, folks.
We sincerely thank you for spending some time with us today. LA Not So Confidential is part of the Crawlspace Media Network. Each episode is hosted, produced, and written by Dr. Scott and Dr. Shiloh. Our post-production editing and sweetening magic is handled by the multi-talented Jason Usry of Ear Cult Productions.
Our theme music, entitled Cool Vibes Film Noir, is composed and performed by the talented Kevin MacLeod. He graciously allows us to use his music via a Creative Commons Attribution license. Please check out all of Kevin's amazing work on YouTube.
All of the resources for each episode can be found on our website at la-not-so-confidential.com. You can find us on Instagram at LA Not So Podcast, on X at LA Not So Pod, and on Facebook at LA Not So Confidential. Media inquiries and bookings are scheduled at alienistentertainment@gmail.com.
Once a month, we go live on YouTube on Saturday afternoon. So pay attention to our social media announcements to join our interactive broadcast entitled Behind the Couch, where we interview guests on a number of psych, criminal justice, and true crime topics.
And lastly, we'd be honored if you joined our Patreon at patreon.com/LA Not So Podcast. With a subscription, you get an ad-free listening experience, additional content, host interaction, and you'll be the first to know about upcoming live events, social gatherings, and super cool swag.
Thanks for listening, and join us next time on LA
Not So
Confidential.